and welcome to this week's water cooler conversation. We are talking all about Loki. Now, for whatever reason, someone at 10:01 a.m. decided to start doing some sort of loud grinding of metal, so hopefully you can hear me with these headphones. We're going to be talking about episode 3. If you have not joined me for one of these weekly water cooler conversations, know that they are all of the spoilers. We dive right in. I am very excited to talk about this episode. It was a bit of a shorter episode, but this will be spoilers for episode 3, which I have dubbed my favorite episode of The Mandalorian that doesn't have Bill Burr in it. We're going to get into why that is in just a minute. We're going to talk about comic book references. We're going to talk about Easter eggs. We're going to talk about the moments that I think will lead to bigger moments in the following episodes, but most of all, insanely, we are already halfway. This episode marks the halfway point in the entire series of Loki. Now, I do think we're getting a second season, more likely than not. I do think a second season is rumored, and I do think there is some merit in there being time travel elements and things already being done, but I do think we're getting a second season. I'm just curious where that all fits in the grand scheme of things. So let's dive into episode 3 of Loki, which is the most action-packed to date by a landslide, and interestingly, the first to be a very different tone. The first two felt very much in that Mindhunter detective, still very Doctor Whovian and insanity, but this one went all the way Doctor Who. This one went all the way Mandalorian. This felt much more like an action sci-fi show than the detective and existential nature of the first two. I think there's definitely some merit in changing up the pace and the tone. It's interesting because I personally had been enjoying the slow, ponderous, again, existential conversations between Mobius and Loki, maybe even more than action. And that's interesting, being, a comic book-based show. A lot of people prefer the action, a lot of people prefer the spectacle, but I like a good talkie. So this was definitely a different tone for me, a different pace. I am excited to see that balance out a bit more. I do understand that with a 6-hour show, you do need to have spikes and attention grabbing in those moments, but I really want to go back to just pondering what the world means. There is obviously some of that in here. There's some great conversations about love, but overall, I definitely think the ponderous nature of the first two is more my cup of tea. Let's dive in, and remember, spoilers. That's all the warnings I can possibly give. I've given you all the spoiler warnings I have. It felt like an episode of The Mandalorian down to the train. It felt very much like going on an adventure with a character to do a task. And I do think this is the first moment in the Disney Plus era that I feel like, oh, this show reminds me of another Disney Plus show. Because WandaVision is so completely different from Falcon Winter Soldier, and so far Loki has been so different from everything else. It was interesting to have that first, oh, this is a network. When you watch an FX show, there's a certain element of dark humor and a certain boldness and a certain thing that takes it out of the other acceptable norms. FX shows can pretty much only live on FX. There's an element to ABC shows, etc., etc. This is the first time I was like, oh, a Disney Plus show. And it kind of feels cool that they're building a brand that feels familiar. The music in this show is spectacular. The score is astounding. I love the Easter egg from the last episode where there's the same musical cue when Loki approaches the librarian desk as when Brad Pitt approaches the desk in Seven, because it's a show very tied to Fincher mythology, and they've been using a lot of really fun sound cues. Really digging it, really dug the tone of this episode. Definitely, again, enjoy the ponderous nature a bit more. They shot the hell out of some action. A modern song over the Marvel Studios logo felt surreal. We've not done that many times. I think it's happened in Age of Ultron, maybe. I think it's happened 1 or 2 times, but not that often. In my opinion, Black Panther has one of the best soundtracks of any comic book movie, and I do think that modern music and leaning into the flavor of the Black Panther soundtrack really, really enhances the experience of that movie. But over the credits, there's something interesting about not having a classical musical swell and all those things, and it definitely sets the tone for a very different feel of an episode. So having modern music over those beautiful green credits was definitely a different element for me going into this episode, and I think it set the tone nicely for this feeling like a different episode. The biggest moment as far as plot development in this episode was the theory we all, I think most of us had, was that the TVA agents were in fact variants. We've talked about that here on this show. My big theory has been that between the soda and the references, there is a 90s element to a lot of the TVA. I feel that the TVA, a lot of those variants came from the 90s. They got plucked from the 90s. Certainly our Mobius lead. I do think Owen Wilson was probably plucked from the 90s with how much he reveres the decade and his love of jet skis. And if he does not get on a jet ski by the end of this season, I will be very upset. But I do think there's going to be a lot of moments about what the TVA represents. I do think there's definitely a fascist nature to the regime, to that corporation. I do think they are the bad guys. In this episode, we got our first concrete evidence of them being the bad guys, in that everyone that works at the TVA thinks they were created by the TVA. And that's another fun commentary on the broader concepts at play here. We had a conversation about Loki thinking it was ridiculous that Mobius thought he was created, and then Mobius was able to turn that right around, like, oh, what's your origin? Created by a frost giant, raised by Odin. All these things sound preposterous when you spell them out, but these are things that people believe, and I won't get into people in our universe's religion. I won't get into our reality's religions, but anytime you spell out anything, it does sound crazy. My beliefs aside, it is really interesting when you spell anything out, how it feels like a betrayal when you find out the things that are more science-based and more reality. And it is going to be interesting to look at the fallout of these TVA agents who have sworn loyalty to the TVA, who think that they were created for the sole purpose of working for the TVA, find out that they are in fact the variants that they are hunting, when they are probably getting Minority Reported where they did something wrong and they get zapped out of existence. How many times has a TVA agent been retired? Does that happen where there's a certain threshold where you learn too much, where you get removed? We're going to find out all these elements, and I'm wondering if Loki learns how to do the mind manipulation that Sylvie has in order to show Mobius where he came from. I'm curious if Loki is able to tap in to a power he doesn't yet have by learning through Enchantress, by learning through Sylvie how to do this, and that allows him to show Mobius actually where he came from, kind of unlocking him in a real reality, kind of mind-wiping him. That'll be my curiosity about how they handle that going forward. I do think there's an element of training going on between Loki learning from Sylvie. I do think there's an element of mischief between what Mobius knows and what Loki's trying to learn for him. I love that we are this deep into the show, and I don't know if Loki is team TVA / Mobius or team Lady Loki / get control of the TVA. All we know for sure is that he's team Loki, and that is the God of Mischief. The fact that the God of Mischief has gotten us so enchanted in his ways that we don't know which direction he's going is really impressive writing and really impressive work on the behalf of Mr. Tom Hiddleston. We also got some more Sasha Lane. The episode opened with Sasha Lane. She was Agent 20, and I do think that is a very important scene to show how long ago the world was in regards to where we are now. So we've talked a lot about the TVA, time moving differently. The more important line to me wasn't just that the TVA agents are variants, because I think a lot of us assumed that. The line to me that was important was hundreds of years ago was that flashback. She says she had to go hundreds of years back in her memories. How old are these agents? How old is the TVA? At what point in the future are we living? This is a show about time, the concept of time, the structure of time, what time is. Is the TVA, in fact, in the quantum zone? This show exists in its own time bubble. We've seen in other comic books, like the negative zone be used as a time construct. We've seen in the MCU, the quantum realm be used as a time construct. Is there a way to be out of time? Is there a way to be removed from time? There's a great rumor about it all existing within the quantum realm. When we shrink down in Ant-Man, we see little cities in the distance, and we find Michelle Pfeiffers. We find characters that have been trapped there for some time. Is it possible the TVA is, in fact, trapped in one of these zones, so time is more relevant? Is it something that Kang has invented and trapped these people in that time? Are the timekeepers real, and do they have these people removed from time? Because if it was hundreds of years ago, and it looked like it was the 80s or 90s, it was modern adjacent, if not modern, where Sasha Lane's character, Agent 20, was revealing secrets, how far in the future from now is the TVA stuff set? That is my curiosity. It is going to be very interesting to see when the TVA is, much less what the TVA is as all this time travel unfolds. Very curious. I'm also curious that Sylvie's power was seemingly dampened, diluted, worn out at points. There are moments in the episode where she has to resort to fist fighting after trying to use her Enchantress powers. So we do know it's an exhaustible thing. I don't think we've seen Loki run out of magic often unless he's controlled. Like, obviously, when he has the power dampener, he cannot Loki his way out of things. But running out of magic, we've not really addressed that. Is it like willpower, where at the end of the day you're more tired? Is it something you can replenish with eating or something? And we've not really gotten into the tangibility of how magic works. So it's interesting to see her run out of magic and have to resort to fist fighting. Now, one of the curiosities for me is not only is she known as Sylvie, which makes comic fans think the Enchantress, the second Enchantress, who was a character that was given magic powers by Loki and therefore manipulated into being sort of a toy for the god of mischief. Loki created Enchantress. The first Enchantress is a big Thor villain. The second Enchantress became a villain when she got power hungry with powers bestowed on her by Loki. Which are we going to get? And is it another character altogether? Marvel in the cinematic universe commonly combines characters. This could easily be a combination of Lady Loki and Enchantress, but I would have thought it was just Enchantress up until this episode, because the way that she fights in that fight scene is very much like Loki's fighting style in Ragnarok. There is some Loki elements to it. She's very verbally describing how she doesn't want to be called Loki. She's very clearly saying, I'm not a Loki, don't call me that, I'm Sylvie, I'm Randy, I'm all these other things. She then makes moves like Loki, she obviously is dressed like Loki, there's obviously magical elements to her that are like Loki, so I am curious what combination of character she is, or if the Loki that made her was able to give her enough magic that it is a great foil. Because we also had that great speech in the last episode where Loki said the difference between what his visual mirroring elements are and the genetic makeup material in making another version of himself. I think, as of this episode, that she is a replication down to the genetic code of a Loki. Because he mentions it very clearly, spells out the difference in that one speech in episode 2 where they're all standing around in a circle. He spells out the difference in his power set. Maybe this Sylvie character is a construct created by a Loki, but down to the genetic coding, so there are two of that person running around, and she's just a fully formed, has been that character for quite some time. And it's also interesting how much her history is muddled. We talked about her being adopted, knowing it very quickly. We talked about the frost gianthood. We talked about all those things in her history. But not only is she intentionally misleading us because she's a Loki, but we're also getting some mixed messages leading me to believe that she is some sort of recreation, which would tie into the comic book lore. Her saying she's not a Loki anymore, her teaching herself magic, implying she was alone for quite some time. Loki is a character that is often alone, but he does have his mom and certain characters that have guided him on his way. It'll be very curious to see what a Loki without guidance would become, and if that is in fact Enchantress, how that all goes. And there's a line about the mother being blips of a dream. That would tie into being a recreation, I think. If you're implanted with memories, how would those memories manifest? I could imagine that'd be very dreamlike, blips of a dream, what her mother even was, all of those things. Is she thinking of her mother as the Loki that created her? There's a lot of questions. We don't know if she even means Frigga or the Frost Giants as we know them going forward. Frigga being Odin's wife / mother of Loki, adopted mother of Loki, versus we don't know what mother this Sylvie character has. A lot of questions about Sylvie in that one sequence on the train. The back and forth between Sylvie and Loki is absolutely wonderful. Their banter is incredible. We've seen some great wit-offs between Mobius and Loki. Now we're getting some great wit-offs with barbs of Loki v. Loki, Sylvie v. Loki, however you want to see it. A lot of great dialogue there. Great work by both of these actors. I didn't know this Sophie DiMartino until this show, and she is exceptional. It was really fun to see them play off each other. A very important moment for representation this episode. We had the confirmation of Loki as the first bisexual character in the MCU. We've had some trickiness with the mouse in representation because Valkyrie is very clearly bisexual, and there was an incredible scene in Ragnarok where she's seen as the lover of one of the Valkyries, making her moment of sacrifice in Ragnarok so much more powerful. The Valkyrie that sacrifices herself for Tessa Thompson's Valkyrie was her lover, adding a lot of very important, very interesting, very essential backstory to why that moment should have mattered way more than just like, oh, we were teammates, we were co-workers. It was her lover, that was her everything, that was her person. So when that person died, it meant a lot more with that deleted scene. You can find the deleted scene almost anywhere. The Tessa Thompson Valkyrie character is bisexual, and it's been a bit neutered. We then, years later, had Endgame feature a character played by Joe Russo, director, one of the two directors of Infinity War, Endgame, Winter Soldier, etc., mentioning his husband, mentioning a he in relation to dating, being the first gay character on screen, confirmed as gay. I mean, there's definitely characters that have hinted at it, and again, they've really neutered this concept in a lot of ways, and it is tricky. I know I can't imagine being a suit. I can't imagine being an executive. I can't imagine what it takes. And finally, we have confirmation of Loki as a bisexual character, which is very important for a lot of people to feel seen on screen. I think it's about time. I think that we are crawling out of our prudish ways as a country. So we need to get to a point where this isn't a big deal, but while it's a big deal, I want to give credit where credit is due. Thank you to the team that confirmed Loki is bisexual. He is not only gender fluid in the comic books, he is bisexual in the comic books, and there is a clear as day line about princes and princesses and a bit of both, just as you are, I imagine, and that is two characters bisexually confirmed in the MCU. So a little bit of representation does go a long way. We need to get to the point where this isn't a big deal. We need to get to the point where this is just fine and standard. But until then, I always want to give it some love. Loki, get him. Both sides, play, have some fun, man. Now let's talk about some comic book references. We got ourselves Lamentis 1. Now, Lamentis 1 literally appears in one comic book. One. In the history of comic books, that location is in one comic book. It's super obscure. I wrote it down. It's something that like I read. It literally kicks off a mini series, but it's one of those one-offs that doesn't have a lot of merit by itself, but the world it builds is a big deal. And now it's probably worth a little bit more because it was name dropped so specifically in an episode of Disney Plus. It's a tie-in to a big event that is Annihilation. There's an event called Annihilation. It's a cosmic event. That's all you really need to know about it because it doesn't tie into the story that I think Loki's going into. So you don't need to know that comic book. But in that comic book, this place is named, and what's cool about this location is it's defined as being on the edge of Kree space. Now, Kree are essential to the Marvel Cinematic Universe. We've met a Kree. Ronan the Accuser, played by Lee Pace in Guardians of the Galaxy, is a Kree. But the Kree are really important because of the Kree-Skrull War. The Kree-Skrull War is an ongoing, generation-spanning war between the Skrull, who are going to be very important very soon. We met them in Captain Marvel. They're going to be very important in Secret Invasion. And the Kree are the race that has been fighting them for generations, and they are also important, and they're religious zealots, is the best way to describe them. They firmly believe this thing, but there are good Kree. Just like with any zealousy, there's always people that are not in that mindset amongst those people. So it'll be interesting to see how they handle the nuance of the Kree, but now we're getting closer and closer to the Kree because this planet is on the edge of Kree space. And in this one singular comic book, the Negative Zone ties into this whole mythology. So now we have some more Negative Zone stuff to play with. And the Negative Zone ties very, very tightly into Fantastic Four. So I'm not saying this connects to Fantastic Four. What I am saying is they're laying seeds and groundwork for when they plant the Negative Zone all up in our faces. They've got a lot of backstory already built in. So Lamentis 1 is in one comic book, but the ramifications of having it here and the color palette used and all those things tie beautifully into things to come in probably Phase 5, I think maybe late Phase 4, but more likely Phase 5. And again, the color palette is just like the comic books, and it was really beautiful to see. Whoop! And we're back! Alright, we've also got the one broken horn Lady Loki is going to be the Halloween costume of the year. I love the detail of the one horn. You got to see a lot more in this episode. The one horn is actually a comic book reference from one of the first arcs that made multiple Lokis. There's been multiple Lokis throughout Loki mythology, but there's an arc that really makes multiple Lokis popular. There's a very fun arc about, there's a teen Loki, a king Loki, and all those things. It was in 2014, 2015, or thereabouts. And Loki is essentially wearing a crown with one horn. He also uses it to fight, which she does. That little nod is a direct nod to comic fans, and I really enjoyed the one broken horn. Plus, it looks cool, and that Halloween costume, man. We're going to see that so much. Judge Renslayer would have definitely killed them both without a thought. She clearly doesn't care about variants very much. I think that means I think the people with the sashes are likely not variants. I think they may be the ones that know about the TVA agents being variants. I think those are the ones that know about the truth of the TVA. I think the judge is aware of everyone being a variant. I'm also wondering if, remember the scene in episode 2 where Owen Wilson's Mobius puts his glass down and there's already rings there, and she talks about other accountants? I think those are all Mobiuses. I think we're going to get multiple Mobiuses. I think we're going to see Mobiuses that would have also put those rings in the glass, that would have also gotten these little trinkets, that would have also filled in the blank here. So I think the other accountant, the other character that she was referencing as doing the job that Mobius is doing, is in fact another Mobius. So I think there's multiple variants of the variants, and I think she knows about it and has no shame in trying to kill them because they're all just fodder to her. Tom Hiddleston, giant overacting as the guard, was delightful. I really enjoyed the orders from the top when he's just big acting, wearing the big blue, and he's just like marching people through. That acting was just so much fun. Really enjoyed that sequence of Tom Hiddleston getting to play around and chew the scenery a little bit, marching Sylvie into the train. All of that was delightful. I'm curious if he is able to develop her enchanting skills, maybe to help Mobius remember that his jet ski life is delightful. I do think he's going to be learning these skills from her, which will come into play in the future. Whether or not we get Loki back in our timeline or not, I do think this Loki carries on in this timeline, and I think he's going to develop those skills, which are super powerful and very daunting for a god of mischief to have. Loki singing. We got to give Loki singing a moment. Loki singing was incredible. Hearing the Asgardian language was beautiful. I love how Celtic it was. I love how old school sea shanty it was. I love how Viking it felt. It was awesome. To hear another language in a show is always a powerful thing, and to hear singing another language is another thing entirely. I love that the God of Mischief just got himself hammered and started singing, caused a problem, and then they got kicked out of the train. At first, I thought it was a ploy. I thought he was acting drunk, but then when they actually got kicked out of the train, I do believe that was not his intent. He did get carried away. I also think it furthers the sensitive boy trapped in the cold, where he's basically insecure and he's looking for attention. In the first 2 episodes, every time he did something right with Mobius, he was like, look at me, I did the right thing. Like, there's this broken kid that needs love and needs attention, which is how he'd be. If your god of thunder is your brother and you're forced into being the god of mischief, again, like we keep talking about with fate, destiny, predestination, all those things, you would be seeking validation. You wouldn't want to be as insecure as you'd end up being. He doesn't want to be bad, but he's just drawn that way. I do think that there is an element to him seeking attention that will be a learning arc for him in this show. I think there will be a maturation out of that. I think that he learned a bad lesson with getting rewarded with Pompeii. In Pompeii, they basically validated him having a little tantrum and it meaning nothing. And that's what he thought he was doing here. The world was ending. It didn't matter what he did. He basically spelled out the thing he spelled out at Pompeii, but they still needed to solve the mission first. They needed to solve everything. So this ending of the episode is very much them not solving the mission and him acting out as he always had. He needs to learn to grow. He needs to mature. He needs to evolve a bit. So it'll be really curious to see from singing Loki to doing that in the right place and time. There is a time and a place for singing beautiful Asgardian hymns, but there is also a time to be on mission and to be responsible and do the job. So it is very curious to see how it went well in Pompeii and not well on this beautiful, beautiful ship in this amazing setting. There's also a line of dialogue right after the Loki singing where he talks about turning a flower into a frog. That is likely not a Throg reference, but anytime a frog is mentioned in Ragnarok or in any Asgardian sense, I will always think of Throg. For those that don't know, Throg is a frog Thor. There is an in-canon, very, very real, in many, many issues, character that is the Frog of Thunder, and there are times when they've used it very interestingly. There's a character that is a Frog of Thunder. I don't want to give anything away in case they do it, but there's also times where Loki has turned his brother into other things. They talk about it in the Thor films as well. Anytime I hear a frog, I think of Throg, and it makes me very happy. Look up Throg, have yourself a weird little Wikipedia rabbit hole. He's a fascinating character. All of the speeches about love are the big moments in this episode as far as dialogue. We've had very big existential crisis in episode 1. We've had more existential crisis plus some religious overtones in episode 2. Now in episode 3, we're talking about what love means. Now, talking about that in an episode where we finally have confirmation of bisexuality is very, very, very interesting, as well as the pain it feels like for Loki. He describes love as hate. He also describes love as like a dagger. He tries to make a metaphor. It falls apart. And I really, really think that it's going to be interesting to see how Loki feels about love by the end of this. I think that Loki is broken and wants to be loved, and Loki is a character that deserves love if he can mature out of some of his God of Mischief hijinks ways. He's a very interesting character in regards to love, so I love him waxing poetic about love. I love the literal visual of a quill and parchment. I love all of those things in regards to this god that just wants to know love. He wanted love from his brother, he wanted love from his parents, he wants to find love, he wants to know love, and he probably uses people wanting to love them. I'm sure there's a part of him that's manipulated others, that he actually wanted love, but he felt like that's what he had to do. He had to use people for his bidding instead of loving them. So I really enjoyed that they're looking into that. They're dissecting what the character is. Every episode where Loki's looking for himself, he is looking for himself. It's a show about Loki trying to find himself, and in many ways he is finding himself. In the metaphorical sense, he's looking for variance. In the literal sense, he's figuring out who he is. So I love that a detective show about finding yourself is about finding yourself. And love is a very important part of that. So you, dear audience, remember to love yourself first, love yourself most, and then figure out loving others, because you have to have this rock solid before you can bring anybody else into it. I always talk about there's three people in a relationship. There's you, the other person, and then the person you are together. If either of these people, this person, I keep swearing. Editor's very mad at me. I'm feisty today. Had my dunks. A little underslept. But if the foundation of love isn't there, the relationship isn't there. So when you're looking at yourself, I think it's very important to look at you before the other, and I think Loki looking at what love means to him is going to be important, and I think it's important for you. You, dear viewer, what does love mean to you? Figure it out. Your life will be better for it. Love isn't hate, and love isn't a dagger. That's the moral of the story. Who is the long-distance postman? Speaking of love, I racked my brain around comic book characters, around mythology, around who this postman could be. Who does this Sylvie love? What is that? Who is this postman? It sounds like a very specific comic book reference. It sounds like it's supposed to be like, aha! I have no idea who the postman is. She talks, and it's a good 2 lines of dialogue. She talks about loving a postman near the end of the world. She talks about how it works because they're chasing Armageddon. She talks about all these things, and I couldn't piece together those pieces of the puzzle. It could just be a throwaway line of dialogue. It could be like any number of the WandaVision lines that were dissected into scrutiny and was nothing. And of course, beyond Loki singing, beyond the beautiful conversations about love, we have to address another! They did it. They did it, you guys. They gave us the biggest callback to Thor 1 they could have given us, and it was a thing of beauty. We see that not only is Asgard full of many broken glasses, but that Loki and Thor are in fact brothers, because the way you order a second round, a third round, a fourth round is to thusly smash thine glass and yell forth another. And it was beautiful. I love that callback. It made me very happy. Those magic. I would like another. Loki, comic book reference-wise, let's talk about Secret Wars, you lovelies. It is not a direct reference to Secret Wars, but a planet colliding with another planet, in this case, a planet colliding with a moon, is a very important storyline in the comic books. There are multiple iterations of Secret Wars. Secret Wars 1 is where Venom came from, a very interesting story about a bunch of heroes and a bunch of villains trapped in another dimension by the Beyonder. I think it will eventually be a movie. It is fascinating. It's where we get the symbiotes. It's where we get lots of great, big, powerful moments, but it's in a little pocket universe, so they could do it as a one-off, and it wouldn't have to tie into anything, and then we could have brought Venom back that way. Obviously, we have Venom now. But the Russo brothers have said they'd love to do a Secret Wars. There's a Secret Wars 2, which is much more... It feels like a sequel. It's using a lot of those riffs. We don't talk about Secret Wars 2. But then, in the mid-2000s, there was a new Secret Wars with an S. So, Secret War 2, Secret Wars. I know it's confusing. Comics are a lot. Secret Wars was a comic storyline about incursion events, which are basically the multiverse, which is the thing that we're trying to prevent with the TVA. What the TVA is trying to stop is the multiverse. The multiverse is a problem in this storyline because they're all coming together, and you on your planet are aware that the person on the other planet is just as whole and full and has just the same life as you, but if you don't stop it, you're all going to die. So there's a group of heroes called the Illuminati, which is composed of like Xavier, Black Panther, Thunderbolt, Namor, some of the great minds of the comic book lore that all join together and make a lot of the planet's big decisions. They're often wrought with guilt because they're making horrible decisions, and you have to judge your moral code amongst... It's a very dense storyline, so I'm only going to give you the very surface stuff, but the Illuminati has to decide to kill all of these other planets before they collide with our planet. So imagine an entirely other Earth, just like ours, another dimension that is just like ours, colliding with our Earth, and there's a group of people on our Earth saying, well, we got to kill all those billions of people so we can survive. And that Earth probably has the same group of people trying to make those same decisions. It's a very interesting moral quandary. It's a very interesting decision to make. This isn't that, but I do believe it is leading towards that conversation down the line. Like, showing multiple dimensions and multiversal concepts and multiple Earths allows for that big of storytelling down the road. I don't know if we'll ever get the Illuminati, but now we can have it. We have all those characters. I don't know if we'll ever get anything like incursion events, but thinking about it, what would you do if you knew there was another you that was just like you on a slightly different dimension and one of you had to go, but on a global scale? So incursion events are very interesting. It's very interesting that they tied some of those visuals into this. The visuals from it are directly tied into the Secret Wars series. This isn't that, but much like I was talking about with the Negative Zone, I do think that is setting up those seeds to be planted for something like that to be used in the future. 10 years of comic books crammed into 20 minutes. I'm so sorry that was an info dump, but I do think it's going to be important later. Love that I still don't know if Loki is Team Mobius, Team Sylvie, Team TVA, Team Takeover TVA. All I do know is that he is Team Loki. Loki is working for himself, he is serving himself, but I honestly don't know if his allegiances lie with this Sylvie character he just met, because he doesn't seem to trust her. They keep talking about trust. There's no trust. There's also the element of how much of a wanting to please Mobius character he is. He wants to make Mobius proud. He also does want to take over the TVA because he is Loki. So there's a lot of interesting... Every line of dialogue has a lot of layers to it. We've talked about it every episode. Who is Loki in service of? So far, just Loki. We'll see where those loyalties lie by the end. I don't necessarily think the device is broken. It seems like a long con to basically see if Sylvie can be trusted. He's the god of mischief. I don't think he wouldn't have stored that thing in a way that it could have gotten destroyed. It seems very easy to make it look broken, but he also wouldn't want to be stranded on a planet. I don't know, I'm being tricked by the God of Mischief, because I don't think the device is broken, but why would he go through all that trouble to get to the Ark? Is it to prove he can trust Sylvie? Is it to prove him to himself that he doesn't need her? What is that device, and how is it actually broken? Is it actually broken? Lots of mischief there, lots of questions. I somehow never noticed the coffee in the credits has a label on it that says Fresh 800 BC, and I just want to give that some love. As a coffee junkie and as a time travel joke, both top notch. Fresh 800 BC. Mine's a little fresher. Mine's fresh 2021. All right, Easter eggs from the episode. My favorite 5 Easter eggs were 2077 is the year like Lamentis 1 was set. We were on Lamentis 1 in the year 2077. I doubt this was a coincidence, but that is exactly 100 years since Star Wars 1. This was a very Star Wars-y, space hoppy series. 1977, 2077. Coincidence? Maybe. Also, maybe a reference to The Great Galaxy Far, Far Away, which is also available on Disney+. We also have the Asgardians going another, which I really enjoyed with a time reference. It is exactly 10 years since Thor 1. Happy birthday, Thor 1, 2011, 2021. Again, coincidence? Maybe. Probably on that one. Most likely. The guards, this is my favorite little detail as a fan of Alien. The guards are named Private Hudson and Corporal Hicks. Those names should sound very familiar, especially Hicks. Bill Paxton and Michael Bihn's characters in Aliens are Hudson and Hicks. I love that very, very much. Hudson and Hicks being 2 important sci-fi characters, so we got ourselves a Star Wars reference, an Aliens reference, and a lot of love for the genre that this universe is setting themselves in. Hudson and Hicks, fantastic work. Those 2 guards that they deal with, boarding the train, Aliens reference. The One-Horn Crown we talked about with multiple Lokis. It is Annihilation Conquest Prologue that they first mentioned Lamentis 1, and that is a loose Negative Zone tie-in, but it's more about the beautiful, beautiful, beautiful color palette. It is glorious work that they replicated that comic so beautifully in this episode. I do think Annihilation Conquest will be a thing down the line with Nova, with Guardians of the Galaxy. I think we'll get to it. As far as an Easter egg, it's mainly about the color of the planet, and I think the Kree space stuff. So those are my 5. very loose Easter eggs. There weren't as many Easter eggs in this episode. The one that is for sure, though, is the Hudson and Hicks, which I thought was delightful. The rest are maybe just coincidences, but I don't think Marvel really does coincidences, so who knows. All right, that is it for this week. I'm going to get some more coffee, and I'm going to go make some TikToks. If you guys don't follow me on TikTok, please do check it out. I'm trying to make some Easter egg videos and grow that there talk so I can tick further. Also, check out The Late Con with Coy Jandreau. If you caught the tail end of this, we do post this over on YouTube, The Late Con with Coy Jandreau. So we shortened this down a bit. We post it over there. So if you want to see these living on YouTube, they live at The Late Con with Coy Jandreau. Also, follow me on Twitter. And if you somehow don't follow me on Instagram, but found this because a good person in here shared it with you, please follow me on Instagram. I'm trying to get 10,000 followers just so I can swipe up. I just want links. I don't even care about the number. I want power. I want to be able to swipe. So I need 500 followers, just 500. Please help me out. So share this with people. I love doing these. I will see you next Wednesday. Follow me on stuff. Follow The Late Con. Follow me on TikTok. Do all the things the internet requires so I can keep making my work and doing my jobs. Get some coffee. Another. Much love, Koi Pond. I will see you next Wednesday at the absolute latest. See you guys.